Relationship with Colombia is very, very strong and continues to be very strong. We have not canceled anything. All the exercises, all the military-to-military cooperation is absolutely continuing. And that relationship couldn't be any more stronger than it is now.
Have you met personally with President Petro, Colombia?
Yes, Senator, twice.
Thank you. General VanHerck, you had some questions about the Chinese balloon incident. I want to ask you questions about the following week when you were, your mission was involved in taking down some other unidentified or kind of not completely described aerial assets. And they were generally described as commercial or benign, but they were in civilian airspace. So they were not completely, even if they weren't hostile, they're not completely benign if they're in commercial airspace where they could pose challenges to civil aviation. So talk a little bit about how things get into commercial airspace without us being aware of them, and are there rules or strategies we need to put in place to be more careful about even benign assets in commercial airspace?
Yeah, ultimately the airspace is the Federal Aviation Administration. They do have policy and regulation in place for objects that fly within the airspace structure. If you're flying an object, and I believe the numbers that weighs more than 4 pounds, then it's required to have an identification device. In the case of the 3 unidentified objects you're talking about, the FAA was not tracking, was not aware of those objects. And when we assessed them, they were assessed to be of a size and potentially a safety threat to aviation hazard. So we did not know exactly what they were. I've talked to the acting FAA administrator about being more aggressive of messaging the requirements and also putting out and enforcing those requirements as well. Those are not mine to do, but I will identify and respond to anything that is in our airspace that we need to potential threat.
And General VanHerck, you indicated that the FAA was not tracking them. Did that mean that these devices did not have the identifier that they are supposed to have if they're in that band?
I can't confirm whether they had it or not. We did not recover them due to the locations they were, but my assessment would be likely they didn't have a device if the FAA was not tracking them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Cotton, please.
Welcome, General VanHerck. General Richardson, thank you for coming back and for your service. General VanHerck, I want to return to the topic of the Chinese spy balloon. You were discussing it with Senator Wicker earlier. You had said your radars first picked up the balloon on Saturday, January 28th. Is that right?
That's correct, Senator.
But you were aware of it on Friday, January 27th.
The intel community made me aware on the 27th.
And on Friday, January 27th, you communicated, is that when you communicated to General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and to Secretary Austin's military assistant?
I communicated with the chairman only on the 27th and conveyed my plan to intercept, ID, and assess the balloon when it became a radar capability we could do.
And when did you communicate with Secretary Austin's senior military assistant?
I did that on the 28th.
28th. Did you ever speak with Secretary Austin about this balloon?
I spoke with Secretary Austin on the 1st of February.
Wednesday, the 1st of February.
To best of my recollection, that's the first verbal discussion with the Secretary. There were emails transmitted back and forth. I set up a battle rhythm, Senator, and updated the department every 12 hours beginning on January 28th, the location, threat, projected flight path, and intent.
Is it your customary practice to speak to Secretary Austin's military assistant and not Secretary Austin?
No, verbally, I routinely speak with the Secretary of Defense. Email communication typically goes through his assistant and provides it back that way.
Okay. On what date did you have fighter aircraft in the air that could have shot down this balloon?
I had fighter aircraft in the air on the 28th of January that were armed. I sent 2 F-35s and 2 F-16s.
They were armed on the 28th?
Yes, the aircraft, the F-16s were armed. They flew off of alert. In Alaska, I have aircraft on alert, and they were armed.
So all that was needed on January 28th was to pull the proverbial trigger?
So to say pull the proverbial trigger, yes. Had they had hostile intent or hostile act, I had the authority and I would have made that decision. So you're exactly correct. After that point, it was not my decision to make that, to pull the trigger, as you say.
There's been publicly released pictures, maybe in video. I think one pilot taking a selfie with this balloon behind him. Were you confident on January 28th what the payload on that balloon was?
Based on the intel community's assessment, I would say I had 80% confidence level. We knew exactly what we were going to see. That was further developed over the next several days as we were able to collect additional intelligence before finally downing the balloon off the South Carolina coast.
I'm aware of that assessment, and I know we can't talk about it here, but I can't say that I would have had the same level of confidence that it didn't have some kind of offensive capabilities. Are you aware of what point the president was personally aware of this balloon?
Senator, I am not.
Why was it okay to shoot the balloon down off the coast of South Carolina, but not off the coast of Alaska?
Well, I think there's many things that go into that decision making. First is originally we didn't really have a good model for what the payload would look like when it fell or potentially threatened anybody on the ground. Now, you can look at population density for various places where the balloon flew over.
I'm not talking about any place over the continental United States. I don't dispute that. I'm talking about the coast of Alaska versus the coast of South Carolina.
Now, there's nothing that physically prevents us from shooting that down on the 28th to the 1st.
And if the administration's policymakers thought they had legal justification to shoot it down off the coast of Carolina, surely they had legal justification to shoot it off the coast of Alaska, right?
Senator, my assessment is the legal basis would have been the same for either place.
That's what I think too. Well, I'm glad that you had fighter aircraft in the skies that were ready to shoot it down. I think that would have been the right call. I know it wasn't your call, that goes up higher than you, but I think it was a bad mistake to let a Chinese spy balloon float all across America and only to leak it to the New York Times once some rancher or amateur photographer in Montana spotted it. I suspect if they hadn't, it would have floated on its merry way all across America, and this would have never become public. And I think that is a dangerous precedent set, not just with China, but with all of our adversaries. But I'm glad you had fighter aircraft from your command in the sky that were ready to act. Again, thank you both for your service, and since this is your last hearing, thank you for many years of service. I know that you won't regret missing these appearances in the future, but we've always enjoyed having you here. Thank you, General. Thank you, General Richardson.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Hirono, please.